Imagine standing in the scorching Louisiana heat in the summer of 1941. Dust rises beneath thousands of marching boots. The roar of tank engines echoes through forests and farmland. Hundreds of aircraft circle overhead while artillery shakes the ground. Nearly 400,000 American soldiers, most of them young, inexperienced, and never tested in battle, are preparing for a war their nation has not even entered yet. They don't know it, but within 3 years, many of them will storm the beaches of Normandy, fight through France, and help destroy Nazi Germany. Their first battle, however, isn't fought in Europe. It begins right here, in the swamps, rivers, forests, and fields of Louisiana. Long before the world knew the names Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, or Operation Overlord, America's greatest generals were learning priceless lessons in one of the largest military exercises ever conducted on American soil. Mistakes were made, strategies were rewritten, and future legends earned their reputations. These were the Louisiana Maneuvers, a forgotten chapter of history that quietly laid the foundation for the Allied victory on D-Day. To understand why these exercises mattered so much, we have to go back to the beginning of World War II. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, launching a conflict unlike anything the world had ever seen. Across Europe, German armored divisions swept through country after country, using lightning-fast blitzkrieg tactics. Poland fell, Norway collapsed, Belgium and the Netherlands were overwhelmed. Then, in just weeks, mighty France surrendered. The speed of Germany's victories shocked military leaders everywhere. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched with growing concern. Although America remained officially neutral, senior military leaders understood that neutrality might not last forever. If the United States was eventually drawn into the war, its army would face some of the most experienced and battle-hardened forces in the world. There was just one problem. The U.S. Army was not ready. In 1939, America's military was relatively small compared with the massive armies already fighting in Europe. Most soldiers were trained primarily as infantry. Many units still relied on horses. Mechanized warfare was in its infancy, and large-scale coordination between tanks, infantry, artillery, engineers, aircraft, and logistics had never truly been tested under realistic conditions. The Army needed more than new weapons. It needed experience. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall recognized the danger immediately. Marshall knew that if war came, American soldiers could not afford to learn their lessons on the battlefield. Training had to become as realistic as possible, even if it meant creating battles on American soil. To accomplish this enormous task, Marshall appointed General Lesley J. McNair, one of the Army's most respected training experts, to redesign how the U.S. Army prepared for modern warfare. Working with Colonel Mark Clark, McNair searched for a location large enough to simulate an actual campaign involving hundreds of thousands of troops. They found exactly what they needed in northern and west-central Louisiana. Stretching across roughly 3,400 square miles, the training area was bordered by the Sabine River to the west, the Calcasieu River to the east, and the city of Shreveport to the north. It included major military installations, such as Fort Polk, Camp Claiborne, and Camp Livingston. Thick forests, winding rivers, rolling hills, dusty roads, and unpredictable weather created conditions that challenged every soldier and commander. Beginning in August 1941, trains arrived day and night carrying thousands of soldiers. Endless convoys of trucks rolled down country roads. Temporary camps spread across the landscape. Local residents watched as their quiet communities transformed into one of the largest military training grounds the United States had ever assembled. In total, approximately 400,000 troops participated, making the Louisiana Maneuvers one of the biggest military exercises in American history. These soldiers were organized into 19 divisions, divided equally between two fictional nations. One force became the Red Army, representing the imaginary country of Cotamoc, while the opposing force became the Blue Army, representing Almat. Though fictional, the competition was very real. The objective was simple: simulate a modern war as realistically as possible. There would be no scripted victories. Commanders had to make decisions under pressure. Units could become lost. Supply lines could fail. Bridges might be destroyed. Rivers had to be crossed under simulated enemy fire. Tanks, infantry, engineers, artillery, reconnaissance units, cavalry, and aircraft all had to coordinate their movements across vast distances. Every success and every mistake would be carefully analyzed. For many soldiers, this was unlike anything they had ever experienced. As September 1941 arrived, the Louisiana countryside was no longer just a collection of camps and training grounds. It had become a giant battlefield. Across nearly 3,400 square miles of forests, rivers, farmland, and dusty roads, two massive armies prepared to fight a war that existed only on maps, but whose lessons would one day decide real battles in Europe. The nearly 400,000 troops participating in the Louisiana Maneuvers were divided into two fictional nations. The Red Army, representing the imaginary country of Cotamoc, and the Blue Army, representing Almat. Together they formed 19 divisions, each with infantry, artillery, cavalry, engineers, armored units, reconnaissance forces, and air support. Every movement was designed to imitate the chaos of modern warfare as closely as possible. The first phase of the exercise began with an offensive. Lieutenant General Ben Lear's Second Army, commanding the Red forces, received orders to cross the Red River and invade Blue territory. Waiting to stop them was Lieutenant General Walter Krueger's Third Army, whose mission was to intercept the attack and force the invaders back across the river. What sounded simple on paper became incredibly complicated in practice. Entire divisions had to move over narrow country roads without creating traffic jams. Convoys stretched for miles. Engineers raced ahead to repair bridges and improve roads before tanks and trucks arrived. Communications officers struggled to keep radio contact between units scattered across enormous distances. Supply columns carrying food, fuel, ammunition, and medical equipment had to keep pace with constantly moving combat formations. The Army quickly discovered that winning a modern war depended on far more than courage. A tank without fuel was nothing more than a heavy piece of steel. Infantry without ammunition could not attack. Artillery without communications could not support advancing troops. Every successful operation depended on thousands of unseen logistical decisions. This was precisely what General Lesley J. McNair wanted to test. Rather than focusing only on battlefield tactics, McNair insisted that every part of the army be challenged simultaneously. The maneuvers became an enormous experiment in coordination. Infantry had to work alongside tanks. Engineers had to clear obstacles before armored columns could advance. Artillery observers needed accurate information before firing missions could begin. Pilots had to locate friendly troops while avoiding simulated enemy aircraft. It was the first time many commanders had attempted to control forces on such a massive scale. One of the most closely watched formations was the 1st Armored Division. The Armored Division concept was still relatively new for the U.S. Army. European campaigns had already shown the devastating power of concentrated tank attacks, especially during Germany's Blitzkrieg campaigns through Poland and France. American commanders needed to know whether large armored formations could achieve similar success. The answer would shape the future of the U.S. Army. Hundreds of armored vehicles thundered across Louisiana's rough terrain, testing their endurance under realistic conditions. Crews learned how difficult it was to maintain vehicles after days of continuous movement. Engines overheated. Tracks required constant repairs. Fuel consumption proved higher than many planners expected. Mechanics worked around the clock to keep vehicles operational. The exercises revealed that armored warfare demanded an enormous support system. Repair crews, fuel trucks, spare parts, recovery vehicles, and maintenance personnel became just as important as the tanks themselves. General George S. Patton, commanding the 2nd Armored Division, quickly demonstrated why he would later become one of America's most famous battlefield commanders. Patton believed speed created confusion, and that relentless attacks prevented an enemy from recovering. During the exercises, his armored formations moved aggressively, exploiting weaknesses whenever opportunities appeared. His performance during the Louisiana Maneuvers earned the attention of senior Army leaders and strengthened confidence in large-scale armored operations. Yet Patton was not the only future legend gaining valuable experience. Officers such as Dwight D. Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, Mark Clark, Joseph Stilwell, and Walter Krueger observed the exercises, planned operations, solved logistical problems, and studied the strengths and weaknesses revealed during the war games. None of them could know that only 3 years later they would command Allied armies fighting across Europe and the Pacific. For the ordinary soldiers, however, history felt very different. Their days began before dawn. Columns of infantry marched mile after mile carrying rifles, ammunition, field packs, helmets, canteens, and other essential equipment. Temperatures often climbed into uncomfortable levee. When the dust finally settled across Louisiana in September 1941, there was no victory parade, no captured enemy flags, no liberated cities. The soldiers packed their equipment, climbed aboard trains and trucks, and returned to their home stations. To many Americans, the Louisiana Maneuvers appeared to be nothing more than an enormous military exercise. But the senior officers who had watched every attack, every failed river crossing, every traffic jam, and every supply problem understood something much bigger. The United States Army had just received a priceless education. The reports compiled after the maneuvers filled thousands of pages. Every decision made by commanders was examined. Every mistake was recorded. Every success was analyzed. The purpose was never to determine who won the fictional war between the Red Army and the Blue Army. The true goal was to discover what would happen when hundreds of thousands of American soldiers fought together in a modern campaign, and how to improve before facing the real enemy. One of the most important conclusions involved leadership. The exercises revealed which officers could think quickly under pressure, adapt to unexpected situations, and coordinate enormous formations across vast distances. Promotions and future assignments were influenced by performances during these war games. Among those whose reputations grew were officers whose names would soon become famous around the world. George S. Patton demonstrated his belief in aggressive armored warfare. His rapid movements showed how tanks could exploit breakthroughs before an enemy had time to recover. The exercises confirmed his talent for leading fast-moving mechanized forces. Omar Bradley gained valuable experience in organizing large formations while learning the importance of maintaining discipline and cooperation between soldiers and civilians. Dwight D. Eisenhower, although he did not command combat troops during the maneuvers, closely observed the complex problems of moving, supplying, and coordinating massive armies. Those lessons would later help him direct millions of Allied soldiers during the invasion of Europe. Mark Clark, Walter Krueger, Joseph Stilwell, and many other officers also refined the skills that would later be tested in North Africa, Italy, France, and the Pacific. The Louisiana Maneuvers also changed how the U.S. Army thought about modern warfare. Before these exercises, many American military leaders still viewed tanks primarily as support weapons for infantry. But the war games demonstrated that armored divisions could become powerful offensive formations capable of moving long distances, breaking through enemy defenses, and exploiting weak points with tremendous speed. The success of these experiments encouraged the Army to expand its armored forces dramatically. During World War II, the United States eventually created 16 armored divisions, whose origins could be traced directly to lessons learned during the Louisiana Maneuvers. The exercises also highlighted another reality that often receives little attention in history books. Wars are won by logistics.